Hello, Darklings! I'm back with another tarot reading of an unsolved true crime mystery. This case was requested by my pal Sherry, and it is about the boy in the box. Little bit of a content trigger warning, folks. This case is very heavy. It deals with the death of a child. There definitely will be mentionings about child abuse, some things that are really not nice involving kids. So if you find that too heavy or too disturbing, then this video is definitely not for you. I'm not going to be showing any images of the boy. You can Google him if you want to see pictures, post-mortem photographs and so on, and facial reconstructions. I'm not going to show any pictures, but I will make mentions to child abuse. So, that warning out of the way, I am using this deck here. It's the Joie de Vivre Tarot by Paulina Cassidy. And I felt that it was a really good choice for a reading about a little boy, a little child. This is a beautiful deck. Lots of little fairies and cute animals. All right. Let's begin. The Boy in the Box is a very sad case. If you are unfamiliar with it, briefly, he is a 4 to 5-year-old little boy who was found naked in a cardboard box by the side of the road in the Philadelphia area in the late 1950s. He's never been identified, and we don't know anything about the circumstances of his death, whether it was intentional or accidental. That's completely unknown. There have been a couple of suspects, and there's also been a couple of people who came forward suggesting that they knew who he was and what was going on, but none of that panned out, and the case is still cold and open since 1957. Unfortunately, the boy in the box was very badly beaten. He had a lot of bruises, some surgical scars, and his hair had been shorn off after death, which is really peculiar. So we're going to ask today for a little bit of information about the boy himself. Who is, or who was, the boy in the box? Okay, I'm gonna warn you. This is a bit heavy. This is gonna be a bit sad. So here we have the Hierophant in the House of the Mind. I feel that he was definitely a very spiritually minded person. He spent a lot of time in prayer. He devoted a lot of his thoughts to thinking about God, spiritual matters. Being a boy who was 4 or 5 years old, I think a lot of kids at that age have very simplistic spirituality, but they can be spiritual nonetheless. I think that he probably had been taught, obviously he'd been taught to believe in God, and he had a lot of unhappiness going on in his life, and he escaped a lot of that mentally through prayer. I feel that also this card is talking about a lot of ritualistic thinking. He had a very structured way of thinking, and I think that this was a way for him to bring some kind of order to his otherwise disordered life. He had little rituals. He was a little bit ritualistic. He had little habits, little rituals that he would do and think about to kind of keep himself sane, to keep himself focused. So the Eight of Cups here, upside down. This card is in the card of the body, and I mean, we know that this boy was abused because of the way that he was found, but this card is the opposite of liberation. This boy was very confined. He was very physically controlled. He was very fearful. I feel like he definitely had a lot of physical reactions because of his intense fear. I warned y'all, it's going to be a bit heavy. Okay, so in the House of the Emotions, we have the Ten of Cups reversed. And this is about isolation. He led a very antisocial life. Emotionally, he was extremely withdrawn from other people, mistrustful, fearful, introverted, afraid of socializing, and clearly he came from such a home, such a situation that, you know, that's completely understandable. Okay. So lastly, we have the Nine of Swords. And this is the house of the environment. I would say that the Nine of Swords is, unfortunately, probably one of the worst cards in the entire deck. And this is so heartbreaking to see this for this little boy. He had a really terrible, terrible home life. Terrible. Lots of abuse. Distrust and suspicion. Fear, pain. A lot of isolation. I feel that he was probably, I get the sense from this that he was probably an only child. And if he lived in another home with other children, he was definitely isolated from them. He was definitely kept apart from other children, at least throughout most of his life. This boy spent an enormous amount of time alone. It very well may have been that he had been confined, even in some way. Oh, this poor boy. Have a good thought for the boy in the box. Whoever you are, little boy. You had a name, and I hope someday we find it. So now I'm going to do a little more of an in-depth reading about the circumstances about his death. Hopefully we can get some insight into who murdered him and why and how. What was going on that caused this little boy's death? Here we go. All right, I see two primary caretakers right here, a woman and a man. So here we have the Queen of Swords reversed. I'm feeling this is his mother. This is his biological mother. This is the woman who was definitely the one in the primarily in charge of like making decisions um, about this boy. So she was the decision maker. He was the facilitator. So here we have the Knight of Wands. So this guy was the physical facilitator. He was probably the one who provided for physical needs. He's the major breadwinner of the home. He's the guy who owns the property or is like the name on the lease. He's the one bringing in the dough to keep a roof over their heads and put food in their bellies. And she's the one who is making, ultimately, she has the final word. She has the final decision about how this boy is raised or treated or punished. Yeah, so these two were working in concert. These two were cooperatively involved with parenting. Whether he was a biological father, I don't feel that sense necessarily, but possibly. But he was definitely the father figure. I feel like this guy as well was primarily the one responsible for the physical abuse. He's here in the house of the body. She's in the house of the mind. So this woman here, the Queen of Swords, is a very disagreeable woman. She has a sharp tongue. Very disagreeable. Not a people person, this woman. And this guy is daring and impulsive, possibly even slightly immature for his age, bit reckless. Definitely sharp temper. You know, this is the guy who flies off the handle, doesn't have the emotional capacity to rein it in, whereas she is more of a mental manipulator. She was more of a psychological abuser, although possibly physically abusive, most definitely possibly. But the crux of her abuse came from psychological abuse and from making decisions like, you wait till your father gets home, I'll tell him what you did, then he's gonna beat you, you know, that kind of thing. So the two of them were definitely working in concert with one another towards the abuse of this boy, and possibly with his death. We will look into that a bit more in a minute. So next we have the Ten of Wands, and this is in the house of the emotions. They felt that he was an emotional burden. As you can see, this figure's carrying a heavy bundle. Yeah, emotionally he was perceived as a burden. He wasn't really wanted. He may have had some behavioral issues that they was just too much, and they didn't know how to cope with it, how to handle it, but he was not a loved and wanted member of this family. This kid was unfortunately perceived as a burden. And finally, in the house of the environment, we have the Three of Coins. Now, this is really interesting. This is talking about financial gain and success, kind of moving upward financially. I'm wondering if they were claiming some kind of financial, whether it was like he was a foster kid and they were claiming money on him, or he was somehow or other, they were collecting like a disability. Somehow this kid was treated as a burden emotionally, but was financially beneficial to them. Maybe it could be as well, if this is his biological mother, she was gaining some child support from the biological dad, not spending it back onto the boy, but reinvesting it into their home. So, buying furniture, buying food, buying beers, something luxurious. This kid was seen as, yeah, I'm definitely feeling from this card that they were reaping some kind of financial gain because of him. And that's probably the only reason why they kept him, because clearly he was not a loved child. He was not considered part of the family even. First card here is the Seven of Wands. This is about arguments, disagreements, quarreling, feelings of inadequacy. I think that the other people in his household, these adults, were definitely putting a lot of their own feelings of inadequacy. A lot of this was being put on this boy, and they argued a lot. This was a home full of disagreements, a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of anger. Physically, I see here the Fool. So it seems to me that these two cards, in conjunction with Justice, which we'll talk about in a minute, I feel like his death was accidental. This was not premeditated. This was not any kind of a plan. This was an accidental death. This was reckless physical behavior that was directly stemming from a verbal argument. And emotionally, they justified it. These people, oh my God, these people justified killing this little boy. Some kind of garbage like, well, he had it coming, he deserved it, he shouldn't have done yada yada, cause and effect, right? Like, as if he was the one responsible for his death. So they felt justified. They felt this is no remorse. This is absolutely no remorse. An accident, but no remorse. Oh, these people. Oh, this is so upsetting. Okay, so Seven of Coins. Now, this was a bit confusing to me, the Seven of Coins here in the environment, because this is about gratitude and seeing the fruits of your labor, recognition, even sort of, evaluating, contemplating. I feel like maybe there was some reflection afterwards, like an evaluation of kind of like, well, what went wrong with that situation? Big of them, right? But I feel like this might definitely be connected with this previous Three of Coins, that these two cards together, if they were financially profiting, financially benefiting off of this little boy, and now he's out of the picture, there's no need to fight with him anymore, they don't have to deal with him anymore, and now they can just continue to collect payment without having the responsibility of parenting. And they actually felt grateful about it. They felt relieved, like this was something to congratulate themselves about. Like, that they got away with it and were still able to profit off of him even though he was dead. I tell you, Darklings, there are some people in this world. All right, let's do another pull. Oh, I'm glad to push those away. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Escaping justice. Yep. Definitely. Okay. All right, so here we have the Page of Wands. I feel like they were always forever feeling very cautious and concerned about being caught. This was always a concern for them. They were never completely mentally liberated from the worry of being caught. Not about the worry about what they did, because they feel like, oh, well, he deserved it. We were justified. We had reasons. Garbage. But they were worried about being caught. They had no guilt, but they had some concerns. Physically, now I found this to be somewhat, the Queen of Wands here physically. Now this is, Queen of Wands is about nurturing, mothering, cards of, she's a fire card, she's passion. I'm like, what is this doing here? And it makes me feel that she felt free, she being the mother, she felt free to spend her physical time pursuing, pursuing other interests. She had, not having to look after this kid, not being physically burdened with this child, she was able to pursue other interests and spend her time doing them, which made her very happy. That's really gross. I'm also getting the sense that somehow by being free of this boy, she was also liberated to be a new mother as well. And I'm wondering now, because I initially had the feeling that this couple, that this was not the biological father of the boy, and I'm wondering now if, because they were now free of this boy, she now feels free that she can have a child with this guy. That somehow or other they could only afford one child, they only had room. I don't know. This dude felt weird about parenting somebody else's boy. Wasn't really, like I said, he wasn't part of the family. He was like an alienated burden. So now that this burden was out of the way, this physically frees her to be a mother afresh. Start over, do over. And again, I'm wondering, because I felt that there were possibly some behavioral issues with this little boy, no doubt because he was being mistreated at home, that maybe she felt like, well, maybe the next one will be better. Maybe I'll do it right, and I'll have the perfect one this time. I'm getting that sense from this card that she now felt liberated to have a new kid and a better kid. Ugh. Yuck. Darklings, yuck. So here we have, and I think that this is pretty self-evident. Emotionally, they felt perfectly fine with escaping judgment. Not being caught was very important to them. They had a lot of concern about that. And emotionally, they felt no remorse. There was no guilt. There was no judgment even upon themselves for what they had done. Cold. That's cold. Finally, we have the Ace of Cups reversed. Now this is in the house of the environment, so this continued to be an extremely unhappy home. There was no love, there was no happiness, no balance, no harmony. The dysfunction just continued. Not surprised. Not surprising to see this here. Yeah. All right, last pull. Eight of Coins. Clever, clever lies. They came up with one hell of a clever little story. I feel like not a lot of people knew about this boy because, as we saw from the reading about him, to begin with, that he was very antisocial, he was very isolated. And like I said, I got that feeling that he was probably even confined. So I don't think that there were a lot of people who even knew he existed. But for anyone who did, and anyone who came asking, they had a story. Probably saying he went off to live with other relatives, went off to be with his bio dad, ran away, some sort of cover-up. They came up with a clever lie, and they came up with it quick, because the magician is all about action and using the tools of the trade. I feel like these two were practiced liars. They were really adept at the art of scams, lies, deceptions. This was second nature to them, and they came up with it quickly and they put it into action as well. They disposed of the boy immediately. They did not linger. They got rid of him, and they got rid of him quick. However, with the reversed sun following in the house of the emotions, it didn't turn out as sweetly for them as they had hoped. Getting rid of that burden, all these plans of, oh, well, now I've got lots of time for myself. No. They stayed selfish. They stayed dysfunctional. And they stayed emotionally imbalanced. Not surprising. What do you know? Right here, Five of Wands, reversed. Deception, trickery, arguments, unnecessary competitiveness. I think that there was a lot of blame game going on between these two. I hesitate to say parental figures because they were hardly parental. There was a lot of, well, it's your fault, you should have, you didn't, you could have, nya, 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 he was your responsibility, nya, nya, nya. There was a lot of that going on between the two of them. And I think some of that comes from the fact that this was not premeditated, this was accidental, this was very sudden. And so there was a lot of unnecessary competitiveness happening, and potentially even competitiveness over the money. Who's gonna get control of the money that they were scamming? Discord, lies, deceit. These people, in my opinion, are terrible human beings, and they did a terrible thing, and they got away with it. And I hope someday, maybe through DNA testing, they will be able to find a relative, which will piece back to his family. And although it's likely that they are deceased now or very old, it's unlikely that they're going to face any kind of jail time or public exposure for their crimes in their lifetime. But I hope someday that they are exposed and we know what happened to the boy in the box. Oh, sad times, Darklings. But thank you for joining me for this reading. I hope that you found it interesting. I hope that you found it insightful. And I urge you to, if you're interested, to check out The Case of the Boy in the Box. It's a really interesting mystery. And again, have a good thought for this boy for what it's worth. And during spooky season, stay safe.